Nosferatu, also known as Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, also known as Nosferatu, Ein Symphonie des Grauens. It's a 1922 silent German expressionist vampire film directed by F. W. Murnau from a screenplay by Henrik Galen. It stars Max Schreck as Count Orlok, a vampire who preys on the wife of his estate agent and brings the plague to their town. Nosferatu was produced by Piranha Film and is an unauthorized adaptation of the 1897 novel Dracula by Bram Stoker. Various names and other details were changed from the novel, including Count Dracula being renamed to Count Orlok. And although these changes are often presented as defense against copyright infringement accusations, the original German intertitles acknowledge Dracula as a source. Film historian David Kalkat states in his commentary track that since the film was a low-budget film made by Germans for German audiences, setting it in Germany with German-named characters makes the story more tangible and immediate for German-speaking viewers. Even with several details altered, Bram Stoker's widow sued over the adaptation's copyright violation, and a court ruling ordered all copies of the film to be destroyed. However, several prints of the movie survived, and the film came to be regarded as an influential masterpiece of cinema and the horror genre. Critic and historian Kim Newman declared it as a film that set the template for the genre of horror film. Ever since I saw the remake by Robert Eggers in theaters, I felt compelled by the story of Nosferatu in general, hence why I'm making a video about the original movie, which is like 102 years old, which is just even crazy to think about. So in this video, I will be reading the plot of the story, in case you guys don't know it, but other than that, I will be going over the themes of the movie, as well as the production, and everything else that went with it, even talking about the remakes. With all of that out of the way, let's get into the story of Nosferatu, 1922. It's 1838, and we're in the fictional German town of Wisborg. Thomas Hutter is our main character, and he's being sent to Transylvania by his employer, the eccentric estate agent Herr Nock, to visit a new client, Count Orlok, who is planning on buying a house across from Thomas Hutter's own residence. As Thomas studies the route on a map, Nock secretly studies a mysterious correspondence in Kabbalistic symbols. While embarking on his journey, Hutter stops at an inn in which the locals are terrified by the mere mention of Orlok's name. In his room, he finds a book about vampires, which he initially scoffs, but puts it in his baggage. So I guess he just was taking it. That kind of stealing? After his carriage refuses to take him further than the entrance to the mountain pass, he travels on foot until after sunset, where he is then met on the road by a coach and rides to Orlok's castle in the Carpathian Mountains, which is a range of mountains forming an arc across Central Europe and Southeast Europe. It's the third longest European mountain range after the Ursals and the Scandinavian mountains. Anyways, he is then welcomed by Orlok himself, although Orlok's also the coach, so it's kind of funny. Anyways, while Hutter is eating supper, he accidentally cuts his thumb, and Orlok tries to suck the blood out, but his repulsed guest pulls his hand away. Hutter then wakes up the next morning to find fresh punctures on his neck, which he attributes to mosquitoes, which I wouldn't, but it's 1838, so what do I know? That night, Orlok signs the documents to purchase the house and notices on the table a miniature portrait of Hutter's wife, Ellen. Earlier in the movie, she gave him this locket, so I don't know why I forgot to mention that. But anyways, admiring the portrait, the Count remarks that she has a lovely neck. So then, Thomas decides to smarten up, and he reads the book again that he got from the inn, and he starts to suspect that Count Orlok might be a vampire. With no way to bar the door to his bedroom, he desperately tries to hide as midnight approaches, but suddenly, the door begins to slowly open by itself, and as Orlok enters, a terrified Hutter hides under the bed covers and falls unconscious. Meanwhile, back in Wisborg, Ellen arises from her own bed and sleepwalks to the railing of her bedroom balcony. She starts walking on top of the railing, which gets the attention of Thomas's friend Harding in the adjacent room. I also forgot to mention this, but she's staying with him while Thomas is out doing business. But anyways, when the doctor arrives, Ellen envisions Orlok in his castle, threatening her unconscious husband, and shouts Hutter's name, which somehow Orlok is able to hear, causing him to withdraw. On the next day, Hutter explores the castle. In a vault, he finds a coffin in which Orlok is resting dormant in the crypt, and he flees back to his room. Hours later, as Hutter watches, Orlok piles up coffins on a coach and climbs into the last one before the coach departs. Hutter manages to escape from the castle and rushes home. Well, let me rephrase that. He escapes the castle, immediately passes out, and then he's in like a hospital, and then he comes home. But before all that, the coffins are taken aboard a schooner, which is a type of sailboat, where the sailors discover rats in the coffin. All of the crewmen later die, and Orlok takes control of the vessel. And when the ship arrives in Wisborg, Orlok leaves unobserved, carrying one of his coffins, and moves into the house that he purchased. Many deaths in the town follow Orlok's arrival, which the local doctors attribute to an unspecified plague caused by the rats from the ship. Nock, who has gone completely insane, is confined in the mental asylum. Well, he's been there for a while now, but this time he escapes. He was there for the whole movie, after Hutter left. Anyways, Ellen reads the book that Thomas found, and it claims that a vampire can be destroyed if a pure-hearted woman distracts a vampire from the approaching dawn with her beauty by offering him her blood by her own free will. So she decides to sacrifice herself. Nock is then eventually recaptured and returned to the asylum, and Ellen opens her door to invite Orlok in and pretends to fall ill so that she can send Hutter to fetch Professor Bulwer, who is a physician. And after he leaves, Orlok enters the room and drinks her blood. But as the sun rises, the rays of which cause Orlok to vanish in a puff of smoke, which Nock in his asylum cell senses and is shattered by. Ellen lives just long enough to be embraced by her grief-stricken husband, and the movie ends with a final image of Count Orlok's castle destroyed. Now that you know the entire plot of the movie, it's time that we get into the themes of the movie. Now, like I mentioned before, there are 3 themes to this movie, and once I go over them, we will then move on to the production. But just know that these themes are fascinating. So, like I said twice already, there's 3 themes in the movie of Nosferatu 1922. The first theme is the other, the second is occultism, and the third is the First War, World War I. Let's first go over the other. First, before we get into, why there's a theme of the other in Nosferatu, the other in philosophy is a fundamental concept referring to anyone or anything perceived as distinct or different from oneself. I felt I had to explain that to you before we get into why that's a theme in this movie. Nosferatu has been noted for its themes regarding the fear of the other, as well for possible anti-Semitic undertones, both of which may have been partially derived from the Bram Stoker novel Dracula, upon of which the film was based on. The physical appearance of Count Orlok with his hooked nose, long claw-like fingernails, and his large bald head has been compared to stereotypical caricatures of Jewish people from the time in which the movie was produced, which was the 1900s, so like 1922, like I've said before. His features have also been compared to those of a rat or a mouse, the former of which Jews were often equated with. Orlok's interest in acquiring property in the German town of Wisborg, a shift in locale from the Stoker's novel London, has also been analyzed as preying on the fears and anxieties of the German public at the time. Professor Tony Magistrale wrote that the film's depiction of an invasion of the German homeland by an outside force poses disquieting parallels to the anti-Semitic atmosphere festering in Northern Europe in 1922. When the foreign Orlok arrives in Wisborg by ship, he brings with him a swarm of rats, which, in a deviation from the source novel, spreads the plague throughout the town. This plot element further associates Orlok with rodents and the idea of the Jew as disease-causing agent. It is also notable that Orlok's accomplice in conspiracy Nock is a Jewish realtor who acts as the vampire's fifth column in the Biedermeier town of Wisborg. There were other views. Writer Kevin Jackson has noted that director F.W. Murnau was friendly with and protective of a number of Jewish men and women throughout his life, including Jewish actor Alexander Granich, who plays Nock in Nosferatu. Additionally, Magenstrael wrote that Murnau, being a homosexual, would have been presumably more sensitive to the persecution of a subgroup inside the larger German society. As such, it has been said that perceived associations between Orlok and anti-Semitic stereotypes are unlikely to have been conscious decisions on part of Murnau. Murnau and Grau gave Orlok in the film a demonic lineage and an occult origin. Orlok is the creation of Belial, one of satanic archdemons. Belial in Psalm 41, 8-10 is also associated with pestilence, with Orlok in film being a manifestation of contagion, with, rats pouring out of his coffin onto the streets of Wisborg and spreading Black Death. Orlok's link to Belial is also significant because Belial is one of the demons traditionally summoned by Goetic magicians, making Orlok someone who practiced dark sorcery before becoming a vampire. Orlok and his servant Nock are communicating in an occult language. The documents between Orlok and Nock were written in Enochian, a constructed language that's said to be that of the angels, which was recorded in the private journals of English occultist John Dee and his colleague English alchemist Edward Kelly in the late 16th century Elizabethan England. The character of Professor Bluer in the film is named in reference to English occult novelist Edward Bluer Lytton. The idea of astral entities arising from the dark thoughts of human beings, responsible for epidemics that call for blood sacrifices in order to prevent them, is also closely linked to that of the alchemist Paracelsus, whose figure is partly embodied in the film in the character of Professor Bluer, who is mentioned in the film to be Paracelsian himself. This is made concrete in the film in the plague epidemic that spreads throughout the city of Wisborg, which cannot be remedied by scientific methods, but by the blood sacrifice of a woman, thus destroying forever the dark being responsible for this catastrophic situation. Now we're on to the third and final theme of the movie, World War I. Now, I know what you're gonna say. What does World War I have to do with this movie? Well, first of all, it's 1922. And second of all, the idea for making this vampire film saw its genesis in the wartime experience of producer Albin Grau. Grau served in the German army during World War I on the Serbian front. While in Serbia, Grau encountered a local farmer who told him of his father, who the farmer believed had become an undead vampire. F.W. Murnau, director of the film, also saw considerable action in World War I, not only as a company commander in the trenches of the Eastern Front, but also later in the air after he transferred to the German Air Service. And he survived at least 8 crashes, which was crazy. Max Schreck, who portrayed Count Orlok, also served in the trenches of the German army. Little is known about his wartime experiences, but there are some signs he may have dealt with some sort of form of PTSD. Colleagues commented that he preferred to keep to himself. He was known to take long walks in the forest alone, oftentimes disappearing for hours at a time. He once stated that he lived in a remote and incorporeal world. Thus, it is considered that the turmoil of the 1920s Germany and the wartime experiences of those who produced the film left their marks on the production of the film. As Lottie Eisner, a dedicated occultist, wrote, "Mythicism and magic, the dark forces to which Germans have always been more than willing to commit themselves, had flourished in the phases of death on the battlefields. These forces were intrinsic to the shaping of cinema's first vampires." Albin Grau himself also linked the war and vampires. This monstrous event that is unleashed across the earth like a cosmic vampire drink the blood of millions and millions of men. Belial as well is the link between war and contagion, as Orlok is linked directly to the Black Death, and many critics have linked Nosferatu's disease-bearing rodents with the transmittable sickness associated with trench warfare in which rats flourished. As noted by Ernest Jones in his psychoanalysis study of nightmares, vampire legends proliferate in periods of mass contagion. The studio behind Nosferatu, Prana Film, was a short-lived silent-era German film studio founded in 1921 by Enrico Dieckmann and occultist artist Alban Grau, named after a theophilosophical journal, which was itself named for the Hindu concept of prana. Although the studio's intent was to produce more occult and supernatural-themed films, Nosferatu was its only production, as it declared bankruptcy shortly after the film's release. Grau claimed he was inspired to shoot a vampire film by a war experience. In Grau's apocryphal tale, during the winter of 1916, a Serbian farmer told him that his father was a vampire and one of the undead. As a lifelong student of the occult and a member of Fraternitas Saturni under the magical name of Master Pacificus, Grau was able to imbue Nosferatu with Hemric and mystical undertones. One example in particular was the cryptic contact that Count Orlok and Nock exchanged, which was filled with Enochian, Hemric, and alchemical symbols. Grau was also a strong influence on Orlok's verminous and emaciated look. He also designed the film's sets, costumes, makeup, and the letter with the Enochian symbols. He was also responsible for the film's advertising campaign, creating movie posters and advertisements. Grau's visual style was also deeply influenced by work from the artist Hugo Steiner Prague, who had illustrated other texts with historic subjects, such as Gustav Meinrich's Golem and E.T.A. Hoffman's Die Illusory des Teufels. I definitely butchered that. Dieckmann and Grau gave Henrik Galeen, a disciple of Hans Heinz Ewer, the task to write a screenplay inspired by the Dracula novel. Although Prana Film had not obtained the film rights, Galeen was an experienced specialist in dark romanticism. He had already worked on The Students of Prague and the screenplay for The Golem, How He Came into the World. Galeen set the story in the fictional North German harbor town of Wisborg. He changed the characters' names and added the idea of the vampire bringing the plague to Wisborg via rats on the ship. Galeen's expressionist style screenplay was poetically rhythmic, without being so dismembered as other books influenced by literary expressionism, such as those by Karl Mayer. Lottie Eisner described Galeen's screenplay as full of poetry, full of rhythm. A little fun fact, actor Conrad Veidt was actually offered the role of Count Orlok. You might know him for being in movies like Different from the Others, The Cabinet of Dr. Calgary, and The Man Who Laughs, because he previously worked with Murnau, but unfortunately he had to decline the role for scheduling reasons. In the search for an alternative, the choice finally fell on the then still unknown actor Max Schreck. Now, I need to apologize real quick because I'm not good at German, so if I mispronounce any of the things I'm about to say, please don't come at me in the comments. Filming began in July of 1921, with the exterior shots from Wismar, a take from Marienkirch's tower over Wismar's pallet place with the Wassenkunst Wismar, served as the establishing shot for the Wisborg scene. Other locations were the Wassertor, the Hilgengeistkirche yard, and the harbor. In Lübeck, the abandoned Salzspeicher served as Nosferatu's new Wisborg house. The one in the churchyard of the Eglindenkirche served as Hutters, and down the Dipnau, a procession of coffin bearers bore coffins of supposed plague victims. Many scenes of Lübeck appear in The Hunt for Nock, who ordered Hutter in the yard of Tuching to meet Count Orlok. Further exterior shots followed in Lomberg, Rostock, and on Sleet. The exteriors of the film set in Transylvania were actually shot on location in northern Slovakia, including the High Tatras, Vartia Dolina, Orgava Castle, and the Va River and Stari Castle. The team filmed interior shots at the Jofa studio in Berlin's Johann Sissel locality and further exteriors in the Tegel forest. For cost reasons, cameraman Fritz Arno Wagner only had one camera available, and therefore there was only one original negative. The director followed Galen's screenplay carefully, following handwritten instructions on camera positioning, lighting, and related matters. Nevertheless, though, Murnau completely wrote 12 pages of the script, as Galen's text was missing from the director's working script. This concerned the last scene of the film, in which Ellen sacrifices herself and the vampire dies in the first rays of the sun. Murnau prepared carefully. There were sketches that were to correspond exactly to each filmed scene, and he used a metronome to control the pace of the acting. The original score was composed by Hans Erdmann and performed by an orchestra at the film's Berlin premiere. However, most of the score has been lost, and what remains is only a partial adapted suite. Thus, throughout the history of Nosferatu screenings, many composers and musicians have written or improvised their own soundtrack to accompany the film. An example being James Bernard, composer of the soundtracks of many Hammer horror films in the late 1950s and 1960s. He wrote a score for a reissue. His score was released in 1987 by Silva Screen Records. A version of Erdmann's original score reconstructed by musicologists and composers, which were Gillian Anderson and James Kessler, were released in 1985 by BGM Classics, with multiple missing sequences composed anew in an attempt to match Erdmann's style. An earlier reconstruction by German composer Bernd Heller has many additions to unrelated classic works. In 1998, Arrow Films released a version on VHS of the film, scored by songs from Type O Negative. Yeah, the Type O Negative. And it also features an introduction with actor David Carradine. In 2022, the New York Times wrote about Dutch composer Josef van Wiesem's new score and record release for Nosferatu. Beginning with the solo played on the lute, his performance incorporates electric guitar and distorted recordings of extinct birds, graduating from subtlety to gothic horror. My soundtrack goes from silence to noise over the course of 90 minutes, he said, culminating in dense, slow death metal. A new score for full orchestra and piano was commissioned by the Louisville Orchestra from its former composer-in-residence Sebastian Chang. It premiered playing live with the film in October of 2023. You know, at first glance, Nosferatu and Dracula couldn't be more different. The former is about a pale-skinned, inhuman-looking creature who feasts on blood and hides in the shadows, and the latter is about a seemingly sophisticated gentleman who's also an inhuman creature that feeds on bloods and hides in the shadows. Despite that, though, horror fans may be surprised by just how much both films ended up contributing to the popular idea of vampires. Those contributions, much like the monsters that inspired them, differ wildly, and we're gonna quickly go over that before we get into the release of Nosferatu. I noticed this as a complaint for the remake of Nosferatu from Robert Eggers, how oh, Nosferatu isn't hot, although some people think he's hot, which some of y'all are weird. That's besides the point. This is the biggest difference between Dracula and Nosferatu, and it's how both stories approach the concept of vampirism. Because you see, for Dracula, the seductiveness of immortal life is depicted not just in the original novel by Bram Stoker, but the dozens of adaptations that have followed in its wake. Count Dracula is often shown to have a hypnotizing effect on his victims, even without using his vampiric powers. His pursuit of Mina Harker also has a sexual edge to it, and so does her husband Jonathan's encounter with Dracula's brides. The film's adaptation of Dracula leans into this, as Bela Lugosi, the actor most commonly known for playing Dracula, gave the Count a strikingly handsome flair that fit with his aristocratic upbringing. The same can't be said for Nosferatu, as Count Orlok is an utterly repulsive creature. He towers over his victims with his pale white skin and bat-like ears, only adding to the horror factor. There's also a difference between the way Dracula and Orlok presents themselves. Where Dracula welcomes his prey, Orlok shuns the light, preferring to reside completely in darkness. Dracula's bite transforms his victims into vampires, but Orlok outright kills most of his victims. Even the romantic angle is flipped. While the finale of Dracula becomes a race to save Mina from Dracula's clutches, Orlok's death comes at the hands of a woman, Ellen Hutter, who discovers that the only way to defeat Orlok is a pure-hearted woman offering her blood. Dracula showcased female sexuality as a dangerous thing, with Mina's free-spirited friend Lucy falling into Dracula's clutches. Nosferatu, however, lets Ellen retain her agency by choosing to kill Orlok on her own, even though it costs her her life. Speaking of Orlok dying, his death also features an element that was unheard of in vampire fiction. While feeding on Ellen, he's caught in the sun's rays and disintegrates. Obviously, this is a fitting death for a vampire who mostly resided in the shadows, but up to that point, sunlight wasn't actually one of the things that could outright kill a vampire. The original Dracula establishes that Dracula can travel in the sunlight, and though it weakens his abilities, it won't outright kill him. Nosferatu would wind up influencing other vampire tales over the years, as everything from Blade to Castlevania depicts sunlight as lethal to vampires. In an ironic twist, Castlevania features Dracula as a major antagonist, bringing the influence full circle. Nosferatu is also significant because it's the first vampire story to link the idea of vampirism to demonic forces. Closer inspection of the contract that Orlok presents to Thomas Hutter shows that it's emblazoned with demonic imagery. Director F.W. Murnau and producer Alan Grau would even give Orlok a demonic origin, as he made a pact with the demon Belial to gain his vampiric powers. Once again, this actually bled into other incarnations of Dracula, specifically the bad one with Gary Oldman, which I think is a good movie, but besides that, the opening has his Dracula renouncing God, stabbing a cross, and drinking the blood that flows from it, which leads to his vampiric transformation. Associating the vampiric with the demonic wasn't the only inhuman element, though, that Orlok's vampirism brought to the table. Being a blood-sucking fiend who sold his soul to the devil is bad enough. But Count Orlok takes things one step further by spreading a plague when he arrives in Germany. This plague is implied to be born from Orlok's demonic deal, as Belial is often associated with disease. A translation of Psalm 41:8 in the Bible, which describes an affliction that strikes David as a disease of Belial, they say, cleaves fast onto him, and now that he lies, he shall rise up no more. This is a far cry from how Dracula's arrival is portrayed, because when he shows up in England, it takes time before people start connecting the missing to his nightly feasts. Dracula also transforms into wolves and rats, rather than influencing their movements. The connection to vampirism and the plague actually had its roots in Nosferatu's release because, well, the Spanish flu in 1918, which was one of the deadliest pandemics in history. I wonder what could outshine that. One treatment involved leaving patients out in the open sun, where it was believed that sunlight could have a healing effect, which actually foreshadows how light ended up becoming the weapon that destroys Count Orlok. So, yeah, Dracula and Nosferatu do share a few key elements, but the latter has not only grown enough to stand apart from his original inspiration, it's also helped shape the modern vampire that audiences know and fear. And now that I've said all that, let's get back into the video and talk about the release of Nosferatu. The Berlin Zoological Garden. Shout out to Walter for teleporting me here, but you're probably wondering why I'm here, and why I'm in black and white. Well, it's 1922. And also, we're here because this is where Nosferatu had its premiere. You see, shortly before the premiere, an advertisement campaign was placed in issue 21 of the magazine Boom und Film, with a summary, scene, and work photographs, production reports, and essays, including a treatment on vampirism by Alan Grau himself. Nosferatu opened in the Netherlands on the 16th of February 1922 at the Hague Flora and Olympia cinemas, but in Germany, it premiered on March 4th, 1922 at the Meermalsola in the Berlin Zoological Garden. This was planned as a large society evening entitled Das Fest de Nosferatu, aka Festival of Nosferatu, and guests were asked to arrive dressed in Biedermeier costume. The German cinema premiere itself took place on the 15th of March 1922 at Berlin's Primus Platz. The 1930s sound version, Die 12. Stunde, eine Nacht des Grauens, which is the 12th hour, a night of horror, which is less commonly known, was a completely unauthorized and re-edited version of the film. It was released in Vienna, Austria on May 16, 1930, with sound on disc accompaniment and a recomposition of Hans Erdmann's original score by Jorge Fieberger, a German production manager and composer of film music. It had an alternative ending, lighter than the original, and the characters were renamed. Why, I don't know, but what you need to know is that Count Orlog was named Prince Wulkoff, Nock became Krastin, and Thomas and Ellen became Kundberg and Margita, and Annie was changed to Maria. This version, of which Murnau was unaware of, contained many scenes filmed by Murnau but not previously released. It was also containing additional footage not filmed by Murnau but by a cameraman named Gunther Kampf under the direction of Waldemar Groger, also known as Waldemar Ronger, supposedly also a film editor and also a lab chemist. The name of director F.W. Murnau is also no longer mentioned in the credits. This version lasted approximately 80 minutes and was presented on June 5, 1981 at the Cinémathèque Francesque. That's some good rice. Oh! Shoot! Sorry about that. I've been talking for a while and I got hungry and thirsty, but I already drank my soda, so let's keep going. Nosferatu brought Murnau into the public eye, especially when his film The Burning Soil was released a few days later. The press reported extensively on Nosferatu at its premiere. With the laudatory votes, there was also occasional criticism that the technical perfection and clarity of the images did not fit the horror theme. The film Cure of 6 March 1922 said that the vampire appeared too corporal and brightly lit to appear genuinely scary. Hans Wullenberg described the film in photo stage of number 11 of March 11, 1922 as a sensation and praised Murnau's nature shots as mood-creating elements. In the Voice Zinch of March 7, 1922, Nosferatu was praised for its visual style. The film received overwhelmingly positive reviews, and it still does. On review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 97% based on 72 reviews, with an average rating of 9.05 out of 10. The website's critical consensus reads, one of the silent era's most influential masterpieces, Nosferatu's eerie gothic feel and a chilling performance from Max Schreck as the vampire set the template for the horror films that followed. In 1955, the Vatican actually included Nosferatu on a list of 45 important films that people should watch, and it was ranked 21st in Empire's magazine's The 100 Best Films of World Cinema in 2010. Robert Eggert added Nosferatu to his list of the great movies in 1987, and this is exactly what he had to say about it. Here is the story of Dracula before it was buried alive in cliches, jokes, TV skits, cartoons, and more than 30 other films. The film is in awe of its material. It seems to really believe in vampires. Is Murnau's Nosferatu scary in the modern sense? Not for me. I admire it more for its artistry and ideas, its atmosphere and images, than for its ability to manipulate my emotions like a skillful modern horror film. It knows none of the later tricks of the trade, like sudden threats that pop in from the side of the screen. But Nosferatu remains effective. It doesn't scare us, but it haunts us. A question that was probably on your mind was, when did Nosferatu enter the public domain? Well, he entered the public domain in 2019. Took that long, but despite it entering the public domain in 2019, the film was already bootlegged, sped up, unrestored black and white, all that stuff. You see, beginning in 1981, the film had various different official restorations, several of which had been issued on home video in the US, Europe, and Australia. These versions, which are all tinted, speed corrected, and have specially recorded scores, are separately copyrighted with respect to new copyrightable elements. The most recent restoration, completed in 2005 and 2006, has been released on DVD and Blu-ray throughout the world, and features a reconstruction of Hans Erdmann's original score by Bert Heller. I actually own Nosferatu on DVD, but I don't know what version of it is, but it has trivia in it, and has a little thing here that says, due to age, these vintage classics may show some slight imperfections. They have been digitally mastered from the best available sources for the highest quality possible. And these are all the stuff. Oh, it's just 2004. So I probably have the one that got the 2005-2006 thing. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, this is the one I have.
Now, you would think we'd be done with the video, but we're far from done. We have like two more things to talk about. The remakes and it being referenced in popular culture or pop culture or whatever. In 1977, Spanish amateur filmmaker Jose Ernesto Diaz Noriega added humorous and iconoclastic dialogues to the film. His adaptation, or The Tournament, which means rerouting hijacking in French, which is a technique developed in the 1950s, anyways, titled Manuscrito Encontrado en Zarahuilhuela, or Nosferatu la Pugante, was based on a S8mm print of the English version. Observing the curious coincidence of the fiction that is related to the film with history, Diaz Noriega adapted Nosferatu's plot to the years of the Spanish translation to democracy. Prime Minister Arias Navarro became Dracula's Navarro, and Juan Carlos de Bourbon becomes Jonathan Carus, Prince of Franconia. Yeah, I don't understand this one, so we're just gonna move on. 1979's Nosferatu the Vampire is a gothic horror film directed and written by Werner Herzog. It serves as both a remake of Nosferatu, but it's also an adaptation of the Bram Stoker Dracula novel. Herzog's film is set in the 19th century Wismar, Germany, and also Transylvania. And it's basically both. I don't really know how to describe it. There's also two versions of the film, one where the actors speak English and the other where they speak German. And this film was actually very well received by critics and enjoyed a comfortable degree of commercial success. Let me know if you guys want me to do a video about this Nosferatu, because I'm actually kind of curious about this one, but anyways, let's move on to the other Nosferatu. Before we got the Robert Eggers remake of Nosferatu, we actually had a remake of Nosferatu in 2023, directed by David Lee Fisher. It premiered at the Imogen Theater in Novi, Michigan on November 11th, 2023. This film is actually pretty unique in the sense that it actually uses green screen to insert colorized backgrounds from the original film atop live action, a process that the director previously used for his remake of another famous movie, The Cabinet of Dr. Calgary, which I mentioned when talking about a specific actor. The movie was later released on video on demand via Amazon Prime Video in September of 2024, and it was streaming on Apple TV on October 18th, 2024. We all know about the Robert Eggers remake, but did you know that they actually announced this way back in 2015? And it was reported in 2022 that the remake would be distributed by Focus Features. And then eventually, filming wrapped up principal photography on May 19, 2023. Then the film released a teaser on June 24th of last year, and then eventually the film came out on Christmas. Merry Christmas. So, we're reaching the end of the video, and this is where I'd like to talk about all of Nosferatu's references in some pop culture, beginning with movies, TV shows, and even being in Dungeons and Dragons? The movies I'm referring to are Dumbo and the Rocky Horror Picture Show. There's a reference to Nosferatu in Rocky Horror Picture Show, but that's all I could really figure out. In Dumbo, though, Timothy Mouth's shadow on the Ringmaster is a spoof of Nosferatu. Moving on to TV, Nosferatu was referenced in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The vampire who lives under Sunnyvale, the Master, was actually inspired by Count Orlok. And then in an episode of The Avengers, not the superhero thing. It's a completely different thing I'll talk about one day in a video. The 1968 episode Legacy of Death has a spoof of Count Orlok named Baron von Orlok. In Dungeons and Dragons, there's a species of vampire named Nosferatu, and footage from the movie was actually used in the Queen David Bowie song Under Pressure, and of course, Nosferatu has been in SpongeBob, at least like 3 episodes. But that, dear viewers, is the whole video. This was very long, but I really do hope you enjoy this video. I've been working on it for literal days now, so if you could maybe like and subscribe, that would be nice. I'll see you in the next video where we see that the Aquabats have returned. Oh, and then another Nosferatu video is coming.